Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It is once again time for my weekly chatty catch-up on everything I read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for roughly the present week, and some general life catch-up. And once again, I'm feeling like my reading this year has been going very, very slowly, and yet I finished some things. Still, I don't know how, but I have. So we have a couple things to cover today. The first is Letters from the Country by Carol Bly, and this is very slim. It's a collection of essays, and I've been reading it for weeks, so I just finished out the last couple essays. This was very good, but also was not at all what I expected. And I think for the better, perhaps. I don't know. Certainly I enjoyed the difference that was there, mainly because I was expecting this to be a collection of essays from the 1970s. These were all written in 1973 to 1979, published in local periodicals in Minnesota. And it is that. It's a collection of essays published during that time about rural life, but it's also doing something that I viewed as kind of more of a modern phenomenon, where it's really grappling with the city versus country or rural political and social ideology. And I kind of got punched in the face a little bit by the first essay. I really was not expecting it. And the first essay, I think, is one of the longer ones as well. Most of these are only a couple pages. So this does have elements of just mundane rural life that I was expecting. There's a whole essay on the phenomenon of being snowed in rural Minnesota in the midwinter. And so those were charming and comforting, I would say. But then there also is this very massively political element. And what I enjoyed so much about this is how familiar and resonant it was for the current moment. Because throughout these essays, staying away from political, timely specific political elements, she is talking about things like the idea of how rural mindset approaches sports versus arts in education. Things like how people talk about their issues locally in the case that they maybe need some psychological help or therapy and don't get it. And ruralites are so discouraged from seeking help. Things like that are addressed at a more broad level, but at a more specific level that feels very timely. This is taking place as she's grappling with the fallout of Watergate and Nixon being a criminal president, as well as the anti-war sentiments surrounding Vietnam and the stigma about that in rural Minnesota, and just the ways that people are grappling with those things. She has a whole essay on the church's response to Nixon and how it approached the idea of just simply giving blanket forgiveness versus what an individual would get. And I just loved hearing her discussion of that topic. So this is kind of a longer section, but I want to read it so you can get a feel for what a firebrand she is talking about this. And she addresses the fact that so many people will not approach topics that are unsavory, and they will stay away from those topics. Meanwhile, she has brought those out into the light in public and published these in local periodicals, and it just really is very confronting. On the surface, such a response to national events is pathetic. So this is giving a quote about Watergate. The man needs forgiveness. On the surface, such a response to national events is pathetic. Under the surface, it is dangerous. It hides the repressed resentment that powerful people get away with stealing from the public, and little people do not. I know that if I'm caught breaking into the Union 76 station, Sheriff Fields is not going to ask me to rob the till ever more slowly until my act of theft is phased out. I also know that I will not be allowed to bank my loot, while large numbers of American people are instructed to forgive me and pity me. Therefore, I feel the terrific injustice of the president's situation compared with mine. But in a small town, rage against a U.S. president is no more acceptable than anti-war protest. By and large, a forgiving and relaxed attitude, rather than an angry and tense one, is the acceptable stance. Although many hardworking people in Madison and other towns and on farms have grief making ends meet because of inflation, and they are honorably trying to use 10 gallons per week or less of gas, and are adulterating their children's meals with Hamburger Helper, they are still not really free, to complain about Nixon over coffee because it isn't acceptable. So the anger circles around inside the people where it turns into a generalized sort of hostility that breaks surface here or there. Rural towns are already physically exhausted anyway, just from keeping the correct persona going. It is exhausting, purely exhausting, to drink coffee together twice a day at 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., men to the pantry and the royal, housewives to one another's homes, and never express a divergent opinion. Recently, I frankly wanted to know some school gossip, but the friend I went to for it said, "Oh no, you see, I'd be the last to know anyway, because I coffee with some of the teachers, and school things are controversial, so that's taboo." Surely, it must vitiate the spirit to spend 2 3/4 hours a day for between 40 and 50 years without speaking one's mind. What such repression of feelings, whether joyful or furious ones, finally leads to is not real pity for Nixon at all, much less justice for Nixon and pity for the United States. What it leads to is self-pity. By and large, the speaker doesn't care how it's settled, just so it is, and he or she can return to private life. But here is the snag. If you express only those judgments and emotions which are correct for your town, you haven't really got any private life. Where there is no private life, there is no enthusiasm, and there is little enough enthusiasm in our towns. The adults spend hours and hours in desultory conversation inside their houses, even after a new snowfall, even in the summer evenings. The teenagers' blanched expressions often suggest they don't hope to live with any passion. Surely, the crawling pace at which the ladies' clubs labor through Robert's rules, and the thousands and thousands of times in both men's and women's organizations that the chairman finally must drawl, well, if there isn't any discussion, then I guess we might as well vote. Surely, these cry for change. Rural Minnesota life looks natural to people living in it. It seems natural to be this way. Impersonal, guarded, hiding thoughts, hiding feelings, edgy about the neighbors, yet it isn't natural. Surely neither of the covenants was made to perpetuate such lackluster soldiering, and it seems a shocker to me that thousands of people who are so honest that you can leave your car keys around in their towns should have been instructed to pity for Nixon. So I just enjoyed the essays in this so much for her sharp and biting sense of analysis, and just the fiery way she's addressing these problems that she perceives as affecting day-to-day life in rural Minnesota. But they're bigger problems. They're everything from the ways that corporate greed is affecting family farms to children spending too much time in front of the TV. It's really all over the place in terms of the topics that she's tackling, but they also feel very, very imminent and timely for today. I did kind of want to reach through the pages to say, "Oh, you sweet summer child," about her being concerned over kids sitting in front of the TV too much, considering where we're at today with having that in their hands all day long, every day, and unable to look away from screens. But there is just so much depth and wit to this that it really, really was a very worthwhile collection. I'm so glad I kind of randomly stumbled upon this at a charity sale and picked it up. So this was really great. Next is another great book, but also probably a new favorite of all time, I think, and that is Tooth and Claw by Jo Walton. This was so good, so good. This was everything I could have hoped for out of it, really. Everyone kind of pitches this as Jane Austen, but with dragons. And I think one of the blurbs on here, The Pride and Prejudice of the Dragon World, Jane Yolen. I think that is accurate and is used because so many more people know of Jane Austen. But this corner of BookTube knows who Anthony Trollope is, for the most part. I think Trollope is very reliably a name that comes up every Victober quite prominently. So most people at least have heard of Trollope. What this really is Anthony Trollope fan fiction, like very, very good Anthony Trollope fan fiction. Because Walton was inspired by a line from Framley Parsonage that mentions dragons. There are not dragons in Framley Parsonage, and this is not a retelling of the story of Framley Parsonage, but it is extremely, extremely true to Trollope's storytelling. So everything about this is Trollope slightly amped up and very spot on. So the setting and world building in every way feel like a real historical story, and yet there has been a significant world building remove from reality. So the religion and the setting will all give you exactly the same vibe, but for instance, the religion has things like parsons. I think half the characters in here are parsons. In fact, it's all clergy. So there are lots of parsons. There are concepts from the religion, like confession, that are the same, but everything about the actual religion and the religious practice are quite different. So it's clearly been modified from reality in some way. And So we're in this world that is very caught up in manners and etiquette. This is a fantasy of manners, and it's all about the interpersonal and social dramas that result from that. So we are following a family of dragons, and right at the onset, the patriarch is dying and is with one of his children, who is also a person, and chooses to give confession at his deathbed, even though that's sort of out of favor and taboo in the religion where they're at currently. That's fallen out of norms with their religion and could get this person in trouble, but he decides to indulge his father. And so, as a result of that, this person has some information where he's sure about the inheritance that's supposed to take place, that is not clarified widely. And so the fallout of that is that quite immediately into the book, the father dies, the family comes together for, I'll say, the death rites, not quite the funeral, and the inheritance is divvied up. The monetary inheritance, there aren't really any quibbles about, but there's a massive quibble about the division of the patriarch's body, because you see, as dragons, they consume one another, and consuming another dragon gives you power and strength and size, and there is massive drama about the division of that, and kind of a not so nice dragon has taken more than his share in the family, and then just stormed off and been quite proud of himself about it. Meanwhile, this person has done something taboo and has information that the division of this part of the inheritance was actually incorrect. And so this sets off a legal challenge. So obviously they can't recover the body, but they are seeking financial recompense for the wrongdoing in division of the father's will, effectively. And so it's wild. Cannibalism is a prominent theme of this book, and yet it feels very appropriate, I guess. I don't know how to relay that. But it does all feel caught up in manners and social mores, definitely. Everyone is very focused on the proper etiquette. So I would say one of the critiques that I have is that legal story, that legal conflict, kind of bookends this book at the start and the end, mainly. And I wish that had been more prominent, but that is also true in my experience of Trollope. He does kind of the same thing in The Warden, where he starts this legal battle, but then meanders away to a more romantic and more direct interpersonal conflicts. And that's what happens here. So one of the Parsons, who's not a relative, is wandering away from the funeral, more or less, having caught an eye of one of the ladies there, though this particular Parson seems to more or less go after all the ladies and is quite undesirable. So he's walking away because as a person he's not allowed to fly, and he decides he's gonna walk away today and then walk back tomorrow to propose to this lady. And in fact, what Walton has done here that is so incredible and smart is that she has made the biology of the lady dragons necessitate a lot of the social mores. So it's very literalized that a man being too close in proximity to a lady dragon will have a biological result and be very apparent to everyone, and she will be overtly and outwardly ruined. And so this kind of creep guy shows up, approaches the lady, and tries to propose to her, and gets too close and comes onto her very strong. And she deals with the fallout of this and trying to hide her social status now as a result. So a huge portion of the book is dealing with that, is dealing with some other social elements and the conflict between the different dragons over status. Interestingly, and with perfect timing, Katie of Books and Things did a lot of discussion about titles, like Regency titles, or I guess they're just English titles in general, not specific to Regency period, I don't think. But Katie did a great video detailing that. The titles in this book are made up, but it very much fits that. So there's a whole hierarchy of class to this, and regardless of what they've done, their land holdings, their hordes, it's all very detailed and specific without feeling like boring or tedious, at least to me, though I kind of like a book with some bureaucracy. Like Fantasy of Manners is definitely my vibe. So I feel like I've rambled on a lot about this particular book, but I just loved it. I really enjoyed everything about it. I didn't even mention, like, there's a whole sort of subplot about one of the lady dragons sort of coming into her own and feeling rebellious against the social rules against her and trying to find her own way independently and make her own choices. Yeah, there just is so much to this, and it really disappoints me that this is a standalone, because I want more in this world so badly. This is just such a great, inventive story, and absolutely perfect, as I said, trollop fan fiction. Like, it is a joy to read, for sure. If you enjoy that type of book at all, you should definitely check this out, because it's truly wonderful. Anyway, okay, so one more for this week. I read a short story, 2 Scoops of Hellfire by Kimberly Lemming, and this is not in her Mead Mishaps series. It's kind of just a standalone short story, and I think it pretty much says on the cover that it's just a short erotica, and that's all it is. It's and it fit for Valentine's Day, so it was very appropriate. More or less, this is a lockdown story. So we have a character, Daisy, who has taken up baking as her lockdown hobby, and is so disastrously bad at it, she actually summons a magical monster. And he is there to please her every whim, more or less. And so baking cupcakes turns into them cleaning up each other, and it's extremely spicy and steamy and explicit, and it's, I think, only about 30 or 40 pages, so that's about all there is to it. But it also has Lemming's trademark humor and fun, I guess, so it is very funny as well. So I just had a good time with it. It was not a standout or super memorable in any way, but I just enjoy her writing so much. So I think that places me in a good spot, because I only have one more novel that I own from the Mead Mishaps, and then she just put out a brand new novel, or it's almost out. So I think like 2025 she has a new novel that's not in the Mead Mishaps series. So I'm catching up on her stuff. So that's it for books read. What I have in progress, Acceptance, still going. I'm about halfway through, so I think this is my priority to finish this week. And then Echo by Pam Munoz-Ryan is what I have started, and I'm just getting into this. And this is like a big chunky one, but it is middle grade, so I expect it'll go pretty quickly. So those are the main things I'm focusing on this week. And I think that's all for books. So onward to what I watched this week, and I think I can't really talk too much about it, but I got all the way caught up on Yellowjackets. And I can't talk too much about it because I would say it's predominantly a thriller show. There are 2 seasons out, I believe, that are what I've watched, and then the 3rd season is coming sometime this year. So I can't remember what network it originally launched on, but it launched on a different network and then finally kind of came to Netflix, and I've been slowly working at it since it showed up there. And it is very gripping. It's really dark, really graphic, and I would say there is a pretty significant amount of violence toward animals. That has been like the hardest part, but it is so gruesome all around, for people, for just treatment of one another, and graphic violence, just gross stuff. The whole premise of this is a team of, like a girls' soccer team, high school girls, are flying to a tournament in, I think, the 80s, and they crash in the wilderness and are stuck there for a significant period of time. And so we're following a split timeline of then and now, them as adults as well, going back and forth, that more or less the ones who survived, they don't all survive, and that's very clear from the beginning, but the ones who survived clearly had to do things to survive as long as they did. And what was that? That's a big question. And appropriate to earlier, cannibalism is a thing that keeps coming up. But I kept going to the question of, everyone seems to be jumping to the idea that the horrible thing they must have done was cannibalism. And yet, it feels like them not confirming, even though everyone is making that assumption, means they must have done something worse. But what could that be? Like, what could be worse than cannibalism? And it's very gripping. Like, I really love both the youth cast is mostly kind of unknown actors to me, and the adult cast is like a lot of really great actors, but doing something kind of different from how I've seen them before. And so the performances have been really fantastic. And are so heartbreaking. Like there's so much emotion to this show in almost every episode, and it's really like a very tense watch, I would say. So it's very gruesome, very tense, like really just constantly edge of your seat. So I'm surprised I didn't make it through more quickly, but I think those difficult elements were kind of holding me back at watching more than 1 or 2 episodes at a time, because it was just really gruesome and very intense. So, but I very much liked it. And finishing up this last season that came out, or the last season that's available on Netflix, it was like that last little bit, I couldn't believe it was ending there, because you do kind of get new information, and then it just kind of leaves you there. It's like, how can you leave us there? And so, yeah, I just want to find out what happens next, really, is where we're at. Yeah, so that is all I finished watching this week. And I did have, weirdly, an internet outage for a while on a day that I couldn't go to the office. And so I had some downtime. So I did actually catch up on some things, or not catch up, but I made progress on some things that have been like long time parked series. So those I think will be heading toward finishing in the next little while, because I actually had them downloaded on my tablet to watch. So that came in handy and helped me kickstart stuff that I really had needed to. So hopefully I will be finishing some of those next week. So I believe that is all for this week. I think for my recommendations, I will just put that video I mentioned from Katie of Books and Things on all of the titles, because it's really fantastic if you have any interest in that at all. She went through in very, very great depth and detail. So I think that is all for my week. I don't have anything really to talk about life-wise because it's been all dog. As I said, I had an internet outage. I had a snow, like I had cancellations because of snow here, even though it didn't wind up snowing a whole ton. But we did get a pretty decent amount of like ice and sleet. So the day was very, very slick, and it was, nobody was going out in it. If you've seen, there was like a national news story that a plane at the airport slid off the runway because of it. It was crazy. Yeah, so I think it was a fairly quiet week because of all of this. And yet I didn't read voraciously, unfortunately. And I kind of watched a lot, but I didn't really make that much progress on stuff. So I made headway on lots of things and didn't finish a ton. So that is the theme for my weekend year so far, I think. So hopefully this next week will feel more productive, or more like I'm not spinning my wheels and rereading the same pages over and over, because that's where I'm at right now. So I likewise hope that your week next week is a good one in both reading and life, and thank you so very much for watching.